You can start recording. We will go ahead and begin. So welcome everyone. I'm Jane Hershey and I'm the director of CitySprouts, and I am so glad to be welcoming you to our online teacher forum, which we've launched this year. This has been a place for teachers to share their garden-based lessons, whether in the garden or the classroom, but usually both, to ask questions, to meet other teachers who are actively engaged in using their school learning garden in their practice or interested in doing it, wanting to hear from others. And I'm really thrilled to see that finally we're getting the hang of the chat box down here. And it's great to see people back. This is just what we had hoped to, that we could create a platform for people to come back and get to know each other and to remember what someone's doing in Virginia or Alaska or Cambridge or Boston, and check in and see how those pieces are going. So Lee, are you on there? I'm checking to see if I see your name. But Lee's been joining us from Virginia. We've got teachers from Cambridge. Nice to see you, Nilsson. Teachers from Boston. Welcome back, Mary. And here we go. So we have got 3 teachers for our final session this fall who are going to speak about using their garden for science. And we've also got the director of science, actually the acting director of the STEM in Cambridge, who is going to make a few remarks at the beginning. Longtime partner of CitySprouts and very active garden user, integrating with science curriculum. And I just want to remind you at the beginning, and I'll remind everybody again at the end, that we will be meeting in person on November 13th, and I hope you all will come. I'm really eager to see your faces and to be able to speak with you face to face. So don't forget November 13th, put it on your calendar. Okay, and today, well, here I am. I guess before we talked about the teachers, I'll introduce myself again. I'm Jane Hershey, the director of CitySprouts. We are a school garden program in Cambridge and Boston. And it sounds like somebody needs to be muted. Mike, if you can take care of that. And we provide on-site support to our partner schools in Cambridge and Boston. And this webinar is our first foray into connecting teachers across outside of our partner school, and we're really thrilled that we've got teachers joining from other places besides our CitySprouts school. Okay. All right, so something about the teacher forum before we begin. It's a place for teachers to share their practices. Each session we focus on a core subject. This 5th session will be science, our second time looking at science. We've got 3 teachers presenting today, and we really want your questions and comments. So please add those in the chat box, and I will be saving those and speaking them for you at the end of the session. So our presenters today, Lisa Scalero, who will be making some remarks before we then hear from Summer Thompson, 3rd grade teacher in Cambridge. Erin Dukeshire, 6th grade teacher in Boston, and then back to Cambridge with Christine Burke, a 5th grade teacher. So tilted a little bit this time towards the older grades. Last week we were very young, kindergarten and 1st, so nice to have some older grade teachers here. Okay, and before we begin, just a couple of reminders about our webinar platform. We are recording today's session, and that recording will be posted on our website along with the previous 4 sessions in this fall series. And you can find them all on the teacher forum page on citysprouts.org. And then, let's see, except for the presenters and me and somebody who Mike is working on muting, everyone's audio has been muted, and that's just to limit the background noise. We're really eager to hear people's questions, and so we're hoping that you type those into the chat box, and we will be, I'll be looking at those and saying them out loud for you at the end of during the question period. And if you haven't already, go ahead and put your name down there and let us know who you are and where you're from and what your relationship or interest or experience in garden-based learning is. Okay, and without further ado, I would like to welcome Lisa Scalera, who's the Acting Director of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math, otherwise known as STEM, in Cambridge Public Schools. I'll just say that Lisa and her staff have been longtime collaborators of CitySprouts. They've been really early adopters, true collaborators with us and with teachers in figuring out how that school garden in these schools in Cambridge can optimally enhance district curricula and learning expectations. So welcome, Lisa. So glad you're with us.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you to Jane for the chance to share a little bit about my experience with CitySprouts and the value that our department sees in both the program and the relationship we have with CitySprouts on the whole and the staff. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background, a little bit about how I came to work with CitySprouts and how the department collaboration has grown. The summer before I even started working in Cambridge, Jane reached out to me. I can remember sitting at my desk in Dover, New Hampshire, and having these emails from Jane trying to get me all excited about CitySprouts and kind of try to gauge, what my support level would be as I transitioned into my role. And she interested me and excited me, but she also had me a little bit overwhelmed and sort of scared about what it meant for my department to think about collaborating and using school gardens. When I finally started here in Cambridge, I was really impressed as I toured the gardens. And I was excited that Jane had the same vision that the gardens shouldn't feel like something extra that teachers had to use, but they should be a support for the district curriculum that we were already asking teachers to use and to teach. And so we started off our work doing some joint professional development for teachers to help them see how they could use the already existing curricula in the garden and use the garden to better support the lessons. And then we thought about how we could take that a little bit further, and we collaboratively developed what we call our Garden Connections documents. And we went through and took all of our elementary and middle school units and found the places where those lessons could naturally be done in the garden. So that teachers could use their garden but not feel like they were then not doing the district curriculum, or they could more clearly see how the district curriculum could be supported by the gardens. And we got really positive feedback about that, and teachers have told us that it has made it feel sort of more connected to what they're already asked to do. I can say I've been a supporter of CitySprouts now since I got here. I spent time on the board of directors and was really impressed with the quality of the work and the commitment that CitySprouts has to supporting all of the kids in Cambridge. I think it's a resource that extends far beyond the science connections that teachers can make, and I'm just really excited about this forum as a way to help teachers connect and allow them an opportunity to present about the great things that they're doing in their schools and in their districts. So thank you so much for letting me welcome you today, and I hope it's been a really great forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I just, I love the thought about you sitting up in Dover getting my emails. Of course, I had no idea as I was reaching out to someone I didn't know. And I have to say, from my point of view, the pushback that we've gotten has been wonderful. I mean, it's been supportive pushback. But to hear from educators and to hear from teachers the ways that the challenges that they're having with garden-based learning has really helped us figure out, okay, how are we going to overcome that? And I have to say I've been really appreciating your questions in this forum, both the positive ones but also the pushback ones. I feel like that's how we're going to really help solve all of the challenges and obstacles which keep us around the country from doing more of this. So a great story, Lisa. Keep those pushback questions coming for me and for the teachers. With that said, I'm going to introduce Summer Thompson to talk about her third graders discovering and exploring habitats in her school garden. Remember to put your questions down in that chat box, and I will be sure that they get heard after all three of our teachers present. Okay, Summer, tell us about your students.
I will do that. We might hear some announcements in the background, so I apologize if that happens. I'm hiding in my classroom right now.
That's okay. We're getting used to that.
Okay, good. Basically, I always try to find ways to connect what we're doing in science in the garden, and I'm very thankful to the garden because we study habitats, and it's really hard to do when you're in an urban environment, and that only life that you see is growing out of cracks or is planted, and it's not really natural. So the garden gives us an opportunity to find some real habitats. So this is our garden, and as you can see, this is in the middle of the playground, and this is what we have. But this small garden is very useful. What my students learn about in the habitat unit, basically, they need to understand that a habitat possesses all of what an organism needs to survive. And so there's lots of little organisms, including plants, that live in the garden. This week we went to go look in the garden. We found snails and worms and beetles, aphids, as well as plants, which is a good connection for the kids. Generally, before I do a couple different activities in the garden every year. One is doing a schoolyard search, and that's when we look around to see what living organisms we can find, and we think about how their needs are met. And then we dig a little deeper into the garden and just kind of look at a certain area. The students will have like a frame or a hoop, and they'll have to sketch out and see, observe very closely what they see in that small habitat. So the materials usually before we do the walk around is we have bug boxes, so some of the kids are able to collect some of the life forms that they see. We have trouts if we want to dig a little bit. And then we use bug and plant identification books to see what we found. And also clipboards to either take notes or if we're looking at the frames, making close observation drawings. To prepare, I try to break up the kids into two. We have small classes, so sometimes that might be my assistant, or the garden coordinator can be used for this as well. And I've had my whole class as well. You can just make it work. And as I said, our goal is to find things. And so sometimes when we're looking in the schoolyard search, sometimes I'll slide up the jobs. I'll have a couple kids with bags that can put leaves of plants to take back to the classroom or the bug boxes. Sometimes I'll have one kid writing down all the organisms that we see. Hello? Okay.
I think you keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yes, keep going. We can hear you.
And then when we are done gathering all of these things, we come back to the classroom and we talk about what we found, and then we do some sketching of everything that we found. I just think that if we didn't have this, I don't know how my habitat unit would go, so I'm just very appreciative to have the garden. That students really, I think, act as scientists, and they get better and better at finding life forms, but also evidence of life forms, and also just realizing how life forms can grow out of cracks and how they can get all their needs met out of a crack in the cement is pretty amazing. And some of the other experiences that we do a whole unit in the spring that's on plant growth and development, which is mostly done in the classroom with Wisconsin fast plants. But we also go out into the garden and plant some plants, but see the life cycle of these plants are a lot longer than the Wisconsin fast plant, so we can kind of compare the two. And I also try to start off the year always like that first week or two acting as scientists and showing them examples of a scientific drawing, and then we practice and do that as well.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, that's terrific, Summer. So I've got some questions here. I think others have been, oh, yeah, there's some questions down there that we're going to wait and ask you after we hear the next two presentations. But thank you very much. That was great. And now, without further ado, Erin, why don't you tell us about your sixth graders and getting ready for the science fair?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Erin Dukeshire, and I teach sixth grade science at Orchard Garden Pilot School in Boston. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we used the Garden for Science Fair last spring. I'll give you sort of an overview of the science fair and the goals of science fair. I'll talk a little bit about how I prepared for the science fair project, working with CitySprouts and the garden coordinator. And then I'll talk a bit about the ways that the garden coordinator and the garden helps my students to learn more about photosynthesis and also scientific inquiry skills and the practices of science. So you can see here that there's a picture of a completed science fair project. And so the science fair that we did last spring was really integrated with our curriculum. So all students came up with questions about photosynthesis, and so there was an obvious connection with the garden because students were working with plants. And then the science fair also required students to use 4 different practices that they had developed during the year, writing a testable question, writing a hypothesis, designing a data table with the data they needed to answer their question, and then also making a claim to answer their question and backing that up with data. So when we began working on the science fair, students were divided into small groups, and after they wrote questions that they were interested in investigating about photosynthesis for their science fair projects, the garden coordinator and I went through the list of questions and we divided them up. And the garden coordinator would say, you know, I can see this question working really well out in the garden, or she and I would decide that there were certain questions where perhaps the data could best be collected in the classroom. Designing the experiments was not a focus of that we were working on with the kids, so we heavily supported the experimental design part. The coordinator and I made a calendar of when we would be working together, and then I was really amazed at how many materials CitySprouts was able to provide. So students, whether they were doing experiments in the garden or in the classroom, were using soil, fertilizer, seeds from the garden. The garden coordinator helped us with materials like hoop houses if students wanted to manipulate temperature or conditions plants were growing under. And then I provided some of our science tools. I especially noticed that for some of the students' questions about plant growth related to their experiments, we needed precise measuring tools like digital calipers, or the garden coordinator would say, we're measuring temperature for this group today, and so I'd make sure we had thermometers available. So the garden coordinator helped students design experiments and then also made it possible for them to collect data that was sufficient so that they could really support really answer their questions. You can see here a picture of students who had ground up leaf samples of different plants that grew in the garden, and then they were comparing the colors of the leaf samples grown in different conditions. And that was something the garden coordinator and I worked on together with the students to help them design that experiment. So students, one way that in addition to helping students design experiments, if they had a question about manipulating temperature, for example, the garden coordinator would say, okay, I think this certain plant would be good and we can manipulate temperature in the garden doing this. Or, so in addition to that, the garden coordinator also made it possible for students to collect data often. And so instead of having to take an entire class period to go outside so one group could measure temperature, or requiring all students to collect a certain type of data at a certain frequency, the garden coordinator would stop by at the beginning of class, take a group of kids out, they would come back 10 minutes later, she'd take another group out, and then we could continue working on what we were working on in class. So it really made it possible for kids to, for us to provide kids with a lot of options in terms of the questions they asked and the frequency and type of data they were collecting, because there was so much support from CitySprouts. And then students were able to use that data as evidence to answer their question that they had come up with. Students were really excited about the projects. They were excited to work in the garden, or they were excited and proud of the plants that they were growing in the classroom. Because there were more adults involved supporting student learning, students were able to make more choices about their data collection and were really able to do a lot of work with that to develop a lot of data collection skills. And some of the things that I found really important were planning with the garden coordinator to set up a calendar for this longer term project, set up times to check in frequently, and I just found that really anything that I even imagined maybe I could ask for help with or for resources from CitySprouts, so there was just so much willingness to help out. And I know that the science fair experience was a really meaningful learning opportunity for our kids.
Great. Thank you very much, Erin. And we've got some questions for you down here. We'll come right back to them. And we've got one more teacher here to present, a 5th grade teacher. And there we go, Christine Burke. And I'm thinking that some of Christine's description of her lessons are going to circle back to what Erin's done in the garden. So I'm thinking about how the technology that Christine's going to talk about with just slightly younger students reflects or differs from what Erin's doing. Erin, there was a lot of technology in your lessons as well. So hold those questions, or don't hold those questions, write them down in the chat box, and I will be sharing them, speaking them out loud for everybody just after Chris does her presentation. Okay, Chris, we'd love to hear about your experience with your students and technology in the garden.
So, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I want to first say that I'm a 5th grade teacher at the Kennedy Longfellow, and this has been my 3rd year teaching 5th grade, coming down from a departmentalized 6th grade history and writing. So teaching science the last few years is fairly new to me, and I do not consider myself a science teacher, which explains why I need Brad and our coordinator a whole bunch. I use him a ton. In my classroom, in our school, we're very fortunate to have been given a grant, a few $1 million grant, where we are a one-to-one school in our elementary. So every student in my classroom does have a classroom iPad, and we have Chromebooks and MacBooks and other pieces of equipment in the classroom that help bring science and the garden a little bit easier connection in the sense of technology. The learning goals, the 5th grade curriculum is a little bit of a recap of the years prior, their science topics, and we start out with life science in the beginning of the school year, where students are asked to sketch in the garden, draw conclusions, think about photosynthesis, the life cycle, things like that. And we do little experiments in the classroom as well, but going down to the garden has been a huge factor, a learning piece in my classroom. And by adding technology, I'm able to use the iPads to not only draw and sketch on them, but also to record what's going on in the garden. So we do take a lot of pictures and drawing right on the iPads. I was a strong supporter of trying to capture as many pictures of ourselves in the garden and what's going on in the garden, so that when we took it back to the classroom, we could then write more in depth about it, or even ask questions about it, things like that. For technology, there are a couple of apps that I found extremely useful for science and technology, and the one that my main lesson was about is called a Show Me app, and another application like this is also called Explain Everything. This is an interactive sort of whiteboard but tutorial system. If you have ever used Khan Academy for any type of videos, Show Me and Explain Everything allows a student to make a tutorial about a topic. in which they're studying or need to gain a better understanding of. Garden use and using the app Show Me was one that took a little bit of just guiding the students how to use the app, but it was a lot of being willingness to create our own tutorial, our own videos. Sorry, I'm trying to just think about what we need to talk about here. In my classroom, we also have smart boards, whiteboards, document cameras for use that we use as a whole class, and a individual. And document camera was extremely helpful in sharing a lot of our garden sketches with the classroom that are in our notebook and our science notebook, not just on the iPad, and for also bringing up pieces of the garden, maybe leaves for a closer study. The activity that took place, my class would visit the garden several times in the beginning of the year and then throughout. And I would ask the kids to go down and just sort of sketch it first and take some notes, take pictures. And then when we got back to the classroom, we would then use it to create tutorials on what we were learning, or what was learned, I should say. A lot of the work was done somewhat individually, where since every kid had an iPad at their disposal, we were able to make it very independent for them. And at the end of the tutorials, I would display or project everyone's tutorial to get an understanding of what they did learn. I mentioned earlier, I don't feel I'm much of a science teacher. It's probably my weakest, but using technology in the garden has made science memorable for my students, and also to feel as if they gained something, especially about the life cycle and plant life and how to interact with the garden. I'm going to ask Michael to show the tutorial, this is a tutorial that is student-made using the Show Me application that is free as a download, and he's going to show us a student video that was made. Michael, if you could set that up, that'd be great.
Okay, here we go. Chris, can you talk about what's happening as we see it? I think the audio is a little hard to hear.
life, the life cycle, photosynthesis, energy, tried to make sure that they include the vocabulary that is necessary to explain it and to create their own sort of video, their own tutorial, so to speak, in which they could teach the class about something they've learned. This was not done at the beginning of the visits into the garden. It was done after we've gone down, we've studied plant life, we've visited several times before we came up to the classroom and tried to create these, as we call them, show me tutorials. And it was just one way that our kids were able to use technology to connect the garden life. One other really great thing, although you didn't see it in that tutorial, is the Show Me application and Explain Everything allows you to import a picture and also comment, record your own voice and thoughts about the picture, or type or write on the iPad as you're doing the recording. So the student could have grabbed a picture from her iPad and talked about it, but instead she wanted to sort of draw it out to think about her own learning. The garden use, for me, had increased after working with and meeting with Brad. I think I mentioned he's a vital part to my own learning in the garden and the students' learning experience. How it worked with Brad and I is he would kind of pop in and say, hey, are you going to plan to use the garden? What do you have going on? I'd sort of let him know where we were in science or even in social studies, other subjects, and say, do you think we could use it for this, or do you have any ideas? We were always willing to go down and learn from Brad and also just have the students pay attention and respect sort of the grounds around us and the school garden, and not think that it just has to be only for growing things, but being able to go down and really work together to see what was built. Brad was so common in our classroom that, you know, I would say, can the kids go down, or, you know, share a quick idea, and he's always very willing to sort of take it and try it with us in our classroom. So he made it very easy for me as a teacher, especially as a teacher who wasn't as confident in science as the other subjects. I didn't feel it was a burden, and that was a huge piece for working with Brad in our garden at our school. The class garden use, again, we do a lot of the things I think that many of the other teachers have presented on, going down there and sketching and drawing, trying to do tests and science fair projects. Our big difference, or one big thing, is just trying to incorporate different applications in our technology, and also just using technology to record ideas. A lot of students who have trouble with their writing would do voice recording of their thoughts or explanation of the process they're seeing. And although I have a one-to-one classroom, this is all things that can be done with just a couple of iPads or a couple of laptops in the garden, or in this case, even a smartphone if you are willing to take a picture of it and share it to your own email. I'm just trying to think here. The slide that I'm showing here is this is a classroom chart that we created as a whole class through individual participation and involvement. We started with the KWL chart. It's very common. This was posted on our class whiteboard and smartboard and put into this so you could see it. This is its original piece that we created. We started with the nose and then the wonders, and we tried to go back afterwards and just try to summarize some things that we've learned through different visits to the garden and throughout our study of life science. Outcomes were pretty amazing from the technology piece. Our students are very tech savvy, as most younger kids are these days, but they are very willing to try to use an application on the iPad or on the computer, and then work it within our own classroom to explain their own learning. best part for me, or one of the better parts for me, is that we had such comfort in using the garden. I myself, as a teacher, don't mind going down there, even without Brad, although I love to have him there with me. I like to go down with the class and have them sketch or write or, do an activity in the garden. We've become really comfortable in the garden, and we've also looked at it as more of a learning opportunity for us, as opposed to just the garden where things are growing. We're thinking about it on how it relates to our own learning itself. And I think one of the big other outcomes I said was just the success. The students who maybe are not the strongest writers might be the best with technology or use it, and really being successful in filling that. So thank you. And hope
Great.
I didn't,
that was fabulous. We've got lots of questions down there. I'm going to start by just keeping the focus for a minute on the 5th and 6th grade teachers, and ask Erin Dukeshire a lesson here about your preparing for the science fair and your garden in Boston. I just want to say, Erin and Chris, it's really great to hear lessons for older students. We've been hearing a lot of lessons from teachers of younger grades, and some of those are the same things that are done in older grades, like worm bins and composting. But this is really, you're really opening up a whole new area for us to think and talk about here. And I'm imagining that these also are ideas that go back down to younger grade teachers. I think I saw a younger grade teacher here responding to some of these ideas as something that they might be able to do with younger kids. But Erin, a question for you. You really made it clear that the material resources and the time management, and then you really worked with the garden coordinator around some time management to increase the options and opportunities for your students. And that's really exciting. We had a question here about what kinds of experiences or data did the garden in particular bring up for your students, and what kinds of questions did students ask from these activities in the garden?
So students wrote questions before they knew that the garden would be involved. I wanted to really keep the questions focused on the process of photosynthesis. So they each group chose some variable to manipulate about a plant, and then some measure of the plant's response. So there were questions. A couple of groups went with how does the amount of sun affect the amount a plant grows, which was kind of disappointing that they didn't move beyond that. Others were really interested in the effect of temperature on plant growth. Several were interested in several groups were interested in removing one plant part and seeing what happened to the others. Some groups asked about how would, if you remove some of the leaves, how would that affect plant growth, given that they know that leaves absorb sunlight to make photosynthesis happen. And there were some questions, some kids were really interested in the water absorption, and so they wanted to, they were asking about factors that might affect root growth, and so that's where the garden coordinator being able to suggest certain plants that would, really, like maybe had a taproot or some, a root, some plant structures that really kids would be able to collect meaningful data on for their questions. That was really helpful.
Were there any tools or technology, Erin, that you used with your 6th graders that prompted different sorts of questions from your students?
I think that, I think some of the questions and tools were sort of used before, and that I teach photosynthesis initially through with a Lego model that MIT has a really similar lesson plan out there to what I use, where kids use Legos to model the reactions of photosynthesis, and so they understood it to be a very, these are the materials and this is the energy that is an input of the process and these are the products of it, and so that drove a lot of, their questions were really driven by the model that they had worked with in class of the chemical reaction, and then the data that they collected was related to their actual plants that were growing.
Great. Well, thank you. And I know that Erin needs to duck out a little early, so if there are more questions for you, we will save them and email you and share the results. So thank you very much, Erin. And I'm going to move back to Chris, staying with older students for a minute here. It was interesting that that you're using technology to help your students look more deeply in the garden. You're really using it not as a counterpoint to nature, but as a way for kids to get more engaged in nature, as well as a way to document what students are doing. Mary O'Brien had a comment that it looked like a great way to keep fifth graders engaged. And I'm wondering, Chris, if the technology prompted, you think, some kids to get more interested in nature and with being outside?
Well, I don't know if I could say it would have the students more interested, but I myself as the teacher was definitely more eager to use the garden because I was more comfortable with the technology piece of it than I was the garden. So it led me to want to think about how to use the garden and technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think the students are pretty excited to use technology whenever they can. As I said, we are pretty fortunate in my classroom and in our school with our technology, and typically they are pretty excited if we mention, oh, we want to use the iPads today, or we have some video cameras. Kids seem to kind of jump on it. They're really excited for it, and quite often they end up showing some of us how to use it, or what they've discovered or things like that about it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And it seems like some of that excitement just comes from, not just, but is a reflection of kids, giving kids an opportunity to teach back, or to teach each other, or enabling those kinds of teaching moments, as Holly said in the chat box.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say about using the technology and even using some of the applications. Like any school, we run into a ton of problems in the sense of the server maybe not working, a connection failure going on with the internet, an app not running properly, and even how to using the app. So the little show me tutorial that you got to see was a student's probably her second try in trying to create that tutorial on that subject matter. We have to pay attention to the background noise using things like that, and those are all little glitches that the students tend to work through and expect with using the technology.
Yeah, get them used to the real world. Summer, we've got a few questions for you about that third grade in the Habitat unit, and there were a number of comments down there about doing the same thing in other schools, and I'm wondering if people from other states are also teaching the Habitat unit. That seems like a pretty standard kind of lesson to teach. I am wondering, so how you did it was really important. Do you have 3 adults who help you lead those stations? Is that right? The garden coordinator, yourself, and then you find a third adult to help lead it?
So each year it's kind of a bit different. So this year I have it's interesting class because for part of the day I have a smaller cohort. So this year I had 9 students, and so I decided to run it on my own due to scheduling, and that worked out fine. I think, depending on the size of your class, if you have 30 kids, I would say that you probably want less than 10 in each group. So I've had parents in the past that have shown an interest in, kind of talk to them and have them help. But if I have an assistant, some years I have an assistant, sometimes I don't. And then sometimes the coordinator is available, and that goes really well because the coordinator comes with all of his or her knowledge, and it tends to run smoother. But I think that there's a way to work around any kind of situation, with how many adults you have. But the more, the better, and obviously the more that they understand the science behind it, the better as well.
Yeah, I remember you, Summer, using that garden years and years ago with your students. You've really been using the garden for a long time as a teacher. I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about how your garden use has changed over time, or if it has.
Well, I used to teach second grade, and so we had different units then, and I think also my interests have changed over time as well. So I try different things, but I know we had composting, and I'm sure that you guys have heard maybe this from other teachers through this program, but composting, and so you would we'd make our own compost bag, and then in the classroom with worms, and watch what happened over time, and then add that to the compost bin, the larger compost bin. We've also done centers out there where kids would maybe have do some planting, stir up the compost and see the heat rise, feel the heat rising from it, and talk a little bit why that might happen, and observations in the garden. So in second grade, it was more, we did life cycles as well, but I think we let our butterflies go out there, that kind of thing. So it's just every year, whenever I can find a connection, I try to do something with that. I know also one of my colleagues has connected social studies, because we do the Wampanoags and Native Americans and the Pilgrims, and so she had connected it with the Three Sisters gardening. So there's so many opportunities that you can just find to connect.
Yeah, that's great. I've got one last question, and I'm going to give it to you, Summer, and then ask Chris if you could answer it as well. And that's the question about how do you see the garden making your students better scientists with whatever skills and content you're trying to teach them? Summer?
I would just say I think I have a young child, and I think just having that interest in what goes on around you and why that happens, I think that sparking that in children, and you can kind of see why they would be interested in science, like seeking answers to why things happen the way they do in nature and the things around us. So that's really my thinking behind the garden. It's just and they all are so excited to go. So it's there's this natural curiosity in everybody that loves science. It's just showing them the way.
Opening it up for them. Thank you. How about you, Chris? What are ways that you see that garden making your older students better scientists?
Well, I would agree with Summer in the sense of just the questioning of why and looking for an explanation as opposed to just taking an answer that's given to them or something they might have read. I think that the garden has really made them go down and become more hands-on. In our case, I think our students have learned to sort of appreciate the garden and the work that goes into creating it, how lucky we are that we have it in our school environment, and how we get to go down to there to learn from it. As scientists, I think that they do a lot more questioning, and they look for a lot more proof on why to explain something.
Interesting.
Just trying to see the life cycle itself, or questioning sort of types of plants or vegetables that are growing and when they're being planted, things like that. But then trying to prove why it actually happened.
That's great. Thank you. I'm thinking that's probably resonating with some of the other people on this call. Well, I want to thank you two both so much, and thanks to Erin and Lisa before you all for really adding to our understanding of how that garden can be used across grade levels in science. This is our second session on science, but throughout this forum in other ways as well. We really, really can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time to put together some slides, describe your lesson, answer our questions, and really engage in what you're doing in the garden, how you're using technology, how you're using your simple outdoor space for habitat study could be transferable or replicable for teachers and garden educators all over. That's a great gift to the field. Thank you guys so much for doing that. And for all of you on the call, yes, thank you. I want to remind you all that you will be getting a certificate in the mail, an email after this for this 1 hour of professional development credit that you've participated in. For teachers in Cambridge and Boston who are signed up through your electronic registrar, your district registrar, you can get further credit for this. And if you haven't done that already and are interested in that, let us know. We can help you find out the answers for that. I know we've had some technical troubles with this new platform that we're exploring and getting used to over this fall series. And we want to be sure that everybody who's participating gets all the credit that they can for it. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need help. I also want to remind you again, and we will email you this invitation. We really would love to see you at the reception on November 13th. It's not just the end of our fall season, it's really our launch for what we hope becomes a really ongoing and rich community of practice for you all. So please come. Enjoy the food and the wine and beer, which is being provided to us by Genzyme. Hear from some other educators, talk to people, meet us face-to-face. This is the chance to talk in person. So some of you are calling in from Virginia, I know, Alan, and other places, New Jersey. We'd love to see you too, although I know it's a harder reach for you. But that's November 13th. 5 to 7 p.m., and we hope that you'll be there. So we've got, this is the end of our fall series, but we've got another series coming up, and you will find that information. We'll email you alerts when we've got that schedule set, but you can also find it on our website. The spring session will begin on March 12th and end on April 16th. And we would love your ideas about topics for that, grade levels for that. We really want to know pushback questions and supportive questions both. What parts of this webinar worked for you? What could make it better? You know, if the technology got in the way, we'd like to know how so that we can really start to fine-tune how to make it work. What's your dream of what would make this an even richer experience for you? What parts of it were useful? So we will be mailing you an email by next Wednesday, so Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. We hope very much that you all will just take the few minutes to send that back to us, and we promise that it's really going to help us form a great, at least as great, if not better, session in the spring. And we promise we'll find as great teachers in the spring as we found in the fall. We are thrilled and amazed at the lessons that we've gotten to hear. So thank you all for being part of this. It's been just a great fall series. I'm looking forward to the spring and what I'm going to learn already, and looking forward to seeing a lot of you, if not all of you, on the November 13th in East Cambridge. So thanks very much, and have a good winter. Bye.
Thank you.